On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, we speak with Cy Kellett, the host of Catholic Answers Live and one of the speakers at this summer's Chesterton conference, where he will speak about G.K. Chesterton and Walker Percy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization. And as of today, the day that we're recording this, my normal colleague and co-host, Gretelyn Darkey, is beginning maternity leave, having just given birth to a beautiful new daughter. So I know you'll keep Gretelyn and her new daughter in your prayers. But joining me instead today is my other colleague, the VP for Operations, Lee Sondeno. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Joe. How you doing? Nice to be here.
Very well, thank you. And yeah, it's good to have you on too. You're an American Lit guy and a Lit major. We've geeked out about F. Scott Fitzgerald on the program here before, and I know we're both excited to have our guest on today, Cy Kellett from Catholic Answers, who's going to talk to us about another great American writer and a Catholic writer, Walker Percy. Hi, Cy.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being on the show, and we're excited to have you not only on the show, but as a speaker for the Chesterton Conference this summer. Before we get into the topic that you're going to be speaking about, and we'll just kind of tease that topic today. We won't spoil it for everyone, but I would be interested in hearing just a little bit about your own background, how you kind of got into the apostolate there at Catholic Answers, and maybe a little bit, if you have any insights on your own background with GK or familiarity with GK Chesterton.
Sure. I have to say it sounds really disorganized when I describe how I ended up at Catholic Answers, and it is just a chaotic mess. But I got interested in theology when I was in college, and I studied theology, and then got a graduate degree in literature. The same month that I got a graduate degree in literature, my second daughter was born, and I realized, I got a degree in theology and a degree in literature, and I'm starting to have mouths to feed around here. So I didn't know. The options seemed somewhat limited. So I went to work for a bishop. I worked for the Bishop of San Diego for almost 12 years, writing for and editing his newspaper, the Southern Cross. And that's kind of how I got into Catholic media. And I loved it. It was very good. What was very good for me was learning about the local church, learning how a diocese works, how it sets its priorities, how the politics and the spirit of the whole thing. That was a really good lesson for me. And they say don't watch the sausage being made, and there's some truth to that, but it's not entirely true. I really fell in love with the Catholic Church during that time. There's so many good and holy people. And then there's the rest of us, but there's the good and holy people make up for it. And so I remember one day I was driving in San Diego, and it was the first time that I heard Catholic radio on the air. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I engaged in an activity that is currently referred to in legal circles as stalking. Of the Catholic radio people. Everywhere they showed up, I showed up and got to know them. And I ended up doing a radio program for the Immaculate Heart Radio Network, which is now Relevant Radio. And then after a couple of years of doing that, ended up here at Catholic Answers. So I think the line through it all, I suppose, is a connection to Catholic media. One way or another, since 1996, I've been involved in Catholic media, and I love it. I love doing it.
That's great. Yeah, I know that. Well, you're great at it, let me say. And Chris Check says, and I agree with him. You are one of the great interviewers. I think that your ability to really take an interest in what somebody is talking about and what they have to say, and put yourself in the place of the listener of the radio show and ask the questions that are burning in their minds is quite exceptional. So kudos
Well, thank
kudos
you.
to you for that. Before that, I know that your background is in English. That I believe you have a master's in English literature, and is that kind of where your interest in Walker Percy began back in your
No,
studies?
it's actually it's the other way around, really.
Hmm.
My interest in literature followed. I mean, I was one of those kids who was always a reader, you know, and so I read. I read more novels as a teenager than I read now. I mean, I was
Hmm.
probably reading 2 or 3 novels a week as a teenager, and then when I got to Boston College, quite accidentally, I got introduced to Walker Percy, and he just fascinated me. There was nobody like him, and uh, so that made me think. After I got out of Boston College, I taught for a little while. I taught religion at a boys' Catholic high school. I worked with the Catholic Worker on the streets in Boston. I lived at the Catholic Worker House. But the thing that kept coming back to me was this love of literature, love of writing. So then I I I just wanted to learn to do it, you know, to do it well. So I went to study and get my master's degree. But definitely Walker Percy far long preceded my interest in kind of an academic study of literature.
Hmm. Well, do you have any other favorites that you can remember? Was it so? I guess
Yeah.
yeah. I'm wondering, were you angling towards the Catholic vein of literature, or was Walker just sort of a standout because of his
No,
way of
not on
approaching the
purpose, but
novel?
I think
Yeah,
I'm so Catholic that I didn't know when I was a kid. I was 12 years old,
yeah.
and my friend Matt Hewitt said, because he was a reader too, and he introduced me to The Hobbit and then to The Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
And I read The Lord of the Rings so intently that I pinched a nerve in my neck because I just didn't move for hours reading it. And I didn't know anything about who this Tolkien guy. I didn't know anything. I didn't know that that's a Catholic book,
Hmm.
but I, it uh, its concerns were just familiar to me, I guess, from the Catholic faith, or so there was something about it. And it's also just, you know, if you're in eighth grade, and it's not like there were movies, Tolkien movies or anything. It's just like somebody said, "Here, read this," and I was just blown away by it. And so then I looked for books similar to that. And so of course people are like, "Well, read the Chronicles of Narnia," and the Chronicles of Narnia are very, very good, and I loved them. They didn't have the effect on me that the Lord of the Rings did, but so I guess it's just that kind of thing, is following the line, you know, like who is doing this, and who's got these same concerns. And so um, eventually that leads to, you know, reading Flannery O'Connor, of course, and then um, uh, I guess eventually you end up at Walker Percy if you read Flannery O'Connor. But it was kind of by accident that somebody showed me some stuff in his nonfiction book, Lost in the Cosmos, which is kind of a response to the TV show Cosmos. I don't know if you all remember that TV show, but it was that Harvard astronomer. Now I'm forgetting his Carl Sagan,
Yeah.
and you know Carl Sagan, God bless him, he didn't understand the world at all. He understood astronomy, but he didn't. And so, but you know, we invest scientists with this kind of priestly authority, and he was just the worst authority on how to be a human being. And not that he was a bad person; it was a matter of knowledge. And so I think Percy wrote Lost in the Cosmos as a corrective to that. And it was so funny and so brilliant and engaging. And it's a truly weird book, very weird. Um, that, but weird in a very wise way.
Hmm.
Not weird for weird's sake. Weird because life is weird, and Percy could mine that. And he's just fun to read. You know, I just ate up everything I could from Walker Percy for months and months and months because he's just fun to me. He's just as fun as can be to read.
Yeah, I am in the process of making a go at it again, of rereading Percy's novels. I did it back in college in a American Catholic literature course that I took, and going through the moviegoer again, and just so struck. The moviegoer is one of those books, I think. So that was the last time I read it, was in college. So I've only read it once. And boy, is that book that lands differently in your early 20s than it does in your early 40s. I think, it's
Oh well, yeah.
it's quite a different book. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about it too is, it's the early 1960s when he wrote that, and Flannery O'Connor has written all that great literature already, basically. And you see, here's another Southern Catholic writer. It's going to be similar, right? No, it is not. It's not even the same universe as Flannery O'Connor as far as what the artist is making. So
Hmm.
it's quite. So I'm curious, who else was in your American Catholic literature? Who else did you read? A Canticle for Leibowitz?
No, we read. So actually, it was all based around a book, and I mentioned this on what will have been a previous episode of the podcast to someone. There was a four-part biography of Percy, O'Connor, Dorothy Day, and Thomas
Oh,
Merton, called by Paul Ellie. Call a life you save may be your own. The life you save may be your own. And
okay.
so we read that biography of the four, and then we read those four. Percy, O'Connor, Dorothy Day's The Long Loneliness, and some things from Thomas Merton, The Seven Story Mountain included.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the focus on it, and it was a great course. Great, I really enjoyed getting acquainted with them, and between the four of them, they really do sort of have a you know panoptical vision of the American Catholic landscape at the
Yeah.
time, because some of them are hanging out with the Berrigans, and Thomas Merton is doing Thomas Merton things, so
Yeah.
they're kind
Well,
of all
that I
over
have
the
to
map,
say, I wish I had had that class, because those at maybe say 21 or 22 years old, I would have said those four people are my heroes.
Yeah.
So I wish I had had that class. Thomas Merton is why I ended up studying theology. I read The Seven Story Mountain, and I
Mm.
thought, well, that's what theology is going to be. And I actually very happy that I studied theology. But uh, yeah, Merton set me on fire with The Seven Story Mountain.
Hmm. Lee, any thoughts?
I was just thinking about my own experience, and again, Joe, just a shout out to other English majors out there, because here's another one in size. So excited to have him on the podcast. But my modern American literature courses were quite different and weren't very Catholic.
Hmm.
But it's interesting because I did run into Walker Percy. It was The Last Gentleman, I believe, was actually the novel that we read in college, and it was always in the vein of this kind of Southern Gothic
Yeah.
novel. You read O'Connor, you read Walker Percy, and it's really in this sort of destruction of humanity, but there's this divine grace that kind of lifts up out of that we were studying, that was really interesting. And I'm trying to think of the term. I was looking it up, that came up over and over in college. It was I think it was like gracious obscenity or something like that, related to Percy.
Hmm.
Taking something that's seemingly pretty odd or pretty ugly, and putting this kind of religious spin to it. And I think that's where maybe he and Flannery O'Connor were similar, right? I mean, everyone in
Yeah.
college, I think, has read A Good Man Is Hard to Find, and they get to the end and they're just shocked, right? And
Yep.
that's where I think it's pretty interesting that Percy came into my fold in the public university system as another great example of Southern Gothic literature.
Yeah. That's his probably. It's funny that they had you read that book, because Last Gentleman is probably his least beloved
Right.
book,
Hmm.
because it's rough. That's a tough
It's
book.
rough. Right. Yep. Yep. And I do remember looking at the syllabus. They did often give numbers to the national hotline to prevent suicides at the bottom of our. So as we're
Yeah.
studying modern American literature, it's like, okay, by the way, as we're reading Hemingway, as we're reading Walker Percy, as we're reading these kind of really,
Well, it's
intense,
actually smart.
yeah,
They all are very deeply connected to suicide. I mean,
right.
Percy's parents committed suicide.
That's right.
So
That's right. He lived a,
it's
a very Southern Gothic lifestyle, and I think that kind of
yeah.
carried over in his writing.
Well,
Yeah.
he recommends in in Lost in the Cosmos that you consider suicide. And then he says, don't do it. But he has a whole mental, he's not trying to get you to commit suicide. He's trying to get you to embrace the fact that you're alive and get you out
Right.
of the ordinary and start realizing, look, all this stuff that's got you down, this is not what your life is. And so he talks about being an ex-suicide. He has the phrase an ex-suicide. And I think he's referring to himself with that as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
if your parents committed suicide, you've got to have that hanging over you all the time. Is that my way out?
Sure.
And I think in becoming a Christian, he became an ex-suicide in the sense that it's not that he said, let me just kind of settle into the late modern American lifestyle, but he found something that made life absolutely amazing. And Percy at root is amazed. He is amazed at what a human being is and what's going on all around him.
Right, including the ugly bits, and I think that's what's
Yeah.
interesting in Percy. He's able to look at the real the reality of humanity and pull something out of that, which I think is really interesting because a lot of times you have this kind of fantastical view of the drama that we're all living in, and his drama was, especially in The Last Gentleman, was ugly. There's death, and there's this, the smells and, and everything else in that book. I don't know if you remember reading The Last Gentleman, but it can get pretty intense, and it's always was an interesting marker for me. The Moviegoer I didn't read until a little bit later, just because I liked what I was reading in Walker Percy, and the Moviegoer was just a kind of a completely different vein, but was always interested in that.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character, and I think maybe we should step back for the viewers and the listeners' sake and just introduce him quickly, because we're taking for granted that people know who Walker Percy is. So, Sai, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a quick uh, kind of intro into who this guy was and what makes him significant and important, and why you chose him as the object of your talk for the conference this year.
Well, okay. Don't let me forget that you ended with why I chose him for my topic, but because
Sure.
I want to get that. But Percy is, he's a middle of the 20th century American Catholic, but he's a convert. He comes from he was raised in a kind of Southern Stoicism by his uncle, particularly who was a writer after the death of his parents. He went to become a doctor. He got his MD, but then was thinking he would be a psychiatrist, but he had to do a rotation at I forget which hospital. It wasn't Bellevue where he got tuberculosis, but he got tuberculosis. He got and so he had to go and do nothing, which was basically what you did for tuberculosis, I guess, in the 1940s. I think we're talking 40s. It might be a little earlier than that, but so he goes and heals. But like many people who are, and this I think is formative, and you can see it in his literature, it's this time out of time where you've been taken out of the ordinary and set aside, and there's nothing you can do about it. He sees that as in Walker Percy, if that happens to a character, it's grace. It's always grace in
Yeah.
his novels. It doesn't matter if it's pleasant or unpleasant. To be taken out of the ordinary and placed in a circumstance where you can attend to life in a different way. And I think that's because it was grace for him.
Hmm.
Somewhere in there, he became a Catholic. I think he was actually put in the sanitarium twice. I think that's what you call it. Not an insane asylum, but like a hospital for people who have tuberculosis. And I think he did a tremendous amount of reading. I think he found his way into the Catholic Church there. Went back down south, lived in just outside of Louisiana on Lake Pontchartrain, and at about the age of 40, I think, began publishing novels. He may have even been past 40 when The Moviegoer came out. So The Moviegoer then it becomes a huge book. It wins the National Book Award. Flannery O'Connor writes him a letter and says, "Good work, do another one." And then he would, for the rest of his life until he died 81, 82, 83, 84, somewhere in there, maybe 86. I'm not remembering at the moment. when he died, he probably put out a novel every 5 years, every 6 years or something, and each one of them is an absolute gem. Um, he didn't he didn't write about the South as Flannery O'Connor did. He wrote about the South as the South that was disappearing because it was
Mm-hmm.
being replaced by 7-Elevens and gas stations, and it was all becoming the same. And he's fascinated by that whole process, and I am too. Frankly, I'm fascinated by how the world goes from being a world of local places to being what you might call a mass culture, and what that does to the human soul. I think that's a central interest of my life. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the people who contributed to it, like Fred Harvey, who invented, modern restaurant branding, and John D. Rockefeller. It's amazing what happened between I guess about 1870s through the 1970s, a total revolution in the way human beings are inserted into the world, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that fascinated Percy, and I don't know if I had the fascination first or if he put me onto it. I really don't know, but whatever it was, I was absolutely taken by the way that that's what Percy is interested in, is the very strange fact of being a human in the modern world. It's very, very strange. Um, so now, why did I want to talk about him?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if if you think about G.K. Chesterton's biography of Saint Francis, a, a stunning book, an absolutely stunning book. But you'll notice that Chesterton doesn't get around to talking about. Now I've never counted the pages. I've never looked. I've never looked at this carefully. Just this is the impression that you get reading the book. He never gets around to talking about Francis for maybe, I don't know, first 10, 15, 20 pages. I don't know. He goes a long time without really taking an interest in St. Francis, the guy who he's writing a biography about. And why is that? Well, now I may be exaggerating the page count. It may just seem like that to me from having read it out. Before I give my talk, I'll go back and actually count. But because what Chesterton is doing at the beginning of that wonderful book is telling the modern reader, look, I can't write about St. Francis and you can't read about St. Francis. I can't say anything that's really true about St. Francis, and you can't think anything that's really true about St. Francis because we don't live in the same world.
Mm-hmm.
And if I try to tell you what that world is like, you're going to put it into a certain set of pious categories, and all of them are going to be wrong. And and so he's almost cajoling the reader. Look, you want to know about St. Francis? Stop being such a modern scientific categorizer. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to have to stop it. And I'm going to have to stop it as a writer. I'm going to have to not care what you think. I'm going to have to. And he goes, and even then, when we, like, his point is, even if both of us do that, this is not going to work. You're not going to get St. Francis. It's a weird way to start a book. Like, it's a weird way to start a biography, but it's very close to what Walker Percy is doing in his writing, which is saying, look, the modern person is in a pickle. The modern person is in a problem, has a problem. And as a Christian, I can't communicate with that person. And not that I can't. I mean, I think neither. I mean, of course, they're writers. They believe they can communicate with that person, but they're making the point again and again and again in their writing that this isn't going to go the way you think it's going to go to the reader. This can't go like. So Chesterton gives you three choices about how to write a biography of St. Francis. The first one, I think, is to put it in, I forget which order he puts them in, but put it in modern categories and talk about him as a social phenomenon and all of that. You can't understand him that way. Second one is put it in pious Christian categories and talk about him as this beloved, beautiful saint. You can't understand him that way. Neither of those is going to get you to the real St. Francis. And so
Mm-hmm.
he proposes doing the third thing, which which is just writing in a way that essentially accepts that this is not going to work. And it's a very funny. I mean, Chesterton's amazing in that. But I mean, you both know Chesterton much better than I do. But it does seem to me that one of his central concerns is the breakdown of communication. That the other person can't hear him if he says just plainly what he says. If he says, "Jesus rose from the dead," The modern person can't hear it. It's not that they don't want to; they can't hear it. They don't. They'll hear it as, that's a category of myth that falls into this type of thing, and what the person really means is this spiritual thing. Or they'll hear it in some sappy, over kind of religionized, I just made up that word, I think, way, but they won't actually hear the amazing fact dude rose from the dead.
Right.
And so you really get a sense of Percy and Chesterton. I think they both share this concern, even though I don't know that they would be how they would accept each other's writing. I think they're both attacking the same problem, which is the modern reader can't read.
Hmm. Yeah, I well, I think Percy likely would have been certainly would have been familiar with and have
Oh,
encountered
sure.
Chesterton had Chesterton lived to see him. I agree. I don't think Chesterton likely would have. I mean, Chesterton didn't like the modern psychological novel period, even if it's coming out of the 19th century. He goes in for Dickens and the more picaresque than he does for sort of the more realistic because he just likes stories. Um, but I I'm so tuned into what you're saying about this preoccupation that they share because as of this recording, I'm working on a paper. I'm past due on it, but I'm enjoying it on Chesterton and Kierkegaard, trying to draw out their similarities. And of course, Percy and Kierkegaard, he quotes Kierkegaard as part of the that's the epitaph of the moviegoer, and Kierkegaard is all over Percy's thought, the
Absolutely. Yes.
categories of Christian existentialism, and
Right.
the same preoccupation there. Kierkegaard's point was how do you become a Christian in Christendom? That was this kind of question he was preoccupied with, and he he knew that it required more than as you say these easy categories, these easy classifications and a sense, and you had to really be shaken awake. You had to really have something of encounter, and I think that all three of them kind of do share that preoccupation. I think where you see it in Percy the most, I don't know if you'd agree, but it always struck me that the essays, especially the two major books, collections of essays of his, just in the titles alone, The Message in the Bottle and Signposts in a Strange Land. Right there, you have the themes of exile, of being not made for this place that we're living in, which is the alienation and the exile not only of mankind from the garden but also modernity under industrialism, right? And then uh the message in the bottle, there's still messages that make it through, that tell us there's another place, there's another plane, that we could access. Anyway, just any thoughts on that
Well,
or on his
yeah,
essay
because
work?
I would point out something from the novel The Moviegoer, which um, just an extraordinary thing Percy does in The Moviegoer. The hero of the novel has Christian faith, but he never speaks about his Christian faith with anybody because he just seems to have this sense that um, they can't get it. Like he can't talk to his stoic aunt. He can't
Mhm.
talk to his science professors. He can't. They won't understand. They'll immediately, as soon as he says the name Jesus, they'll or says gospel or Christianity, or it'll all get put into a modern box. And he just doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want to be categorized like that because that's not what it is for him, and he's struggling with this. And but you never see him talk about it, uh, to my recollection, through the whole novel. Except there's this character, there's this boy um, who is in a wheelchair, and at one point he's talking with children about what will happen with this boy in the resurrection, and they ask him, will he still be in his wheelchair, or will he be like us? And the character at that point says, he'll be like you. And that is a perfect confession of faith. That what
Hmm.
Walker Percy is having the character do, who can't speak to anybody about his faith because they won't understand, what he can do is in a time where the children are sad about their friend, and they are asking a sincere question, not trying to count. They just want to know, will he in that circumstance with children in distress, he can make his confession of faith. And what a beautiful confession of faith. He'll be like you. And this is a confession of the resurrection. This is a confession of the perfection of the human person in Jesus Christ. This is all of that is there. And I am absolutely struck by that. In his first novel, this is his concern is there here's this character who has come to Christian faith but can't speak about it, and because he knows the message can't be received. But as soon as he sees a situation or is presented with a situation where the message can be received, he just makes an absolutely beautiful confession of faith. He'll be like you.
Hmm.
I love that about Percy. So, like as you said, it's in the titles of these books, it's in his essays, it's in everything, but it's right there in the first novel that he's talking about the fact that you can't, he's trying to get the Christian to think about, why can't we speak about this? It's not in us, it's in the world. There's something wrong with the world's capacity to hear it, and we have to break through that. And children in crisis is one of the places where you can just speak the truth, and they'll hear the truth, and it'll just be the truth, and there doesn't have to be all this other kind of spiritual confusion and angst.
Hmm.
I think in that vein, what's really interesting that both of you are bringing up is I always thought it was interesting that Walker Percy's reason for being Catholic was very similar to Chesterton's reason for being Catholic, where he basically says, you know, look, it's because it's the truth. It's true. You
Yeah,
know, Chesterton saying 10,000 reasons all amounts to one thing. It's just it happens to be true. And they ask Walker Percy, well, why are you Catholic? It's because I believe in the Catholic Church as being true, and it's always this balance of despair and dogma, and being able to look at the Catholic Church as being, if you were to throw a lot of these sort of sentiments to, like, hey, why don't you believe in Jesus, to anyone off of the street, of course they would try to rationalize it to death. But it's because the Catholic Church is able to come in with its dogma to say, no, this is the truth, that
right.
Percy's able to hold on to something a little more strongly, and I think that comes through really clearly. And your example of the moviegoer with the child, I think, in the example of a lot of the death scenes that Percy writes about as well, is through this despair, there's that hope of the truth coming through. And that's really, I think, what sustains him. And even kind of going back to originally with his parents, committing suicide and just living in this hopelessness and despair, and that's what really is bringing him through, and brings him through.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of his novels and a lot of his characters.
Yes, he was a true. He was like Chesterton. He was a believer. He was not one of those. Yeah. In my own modern way, I've accommodated myself to Catholicism. He believed
Exactly.
the Catholic faith.
Exactly.
And it's a very lovable characteristic when you
Yep.
see it in somebody as bright as Chesterton or Percy.
Yeah. He's also just in some ways quintessentially a writer of New Orleans. And I had a conversation with somebody recently because he was talking about Percy as a Southern author, Southern writer. And I get that, I obviously, but his South is not Flannery O'Connor's South. Like, New
Yeah,
Orleans is a different place. It just is. And he's, especially in the moviegoer at least, he's really writing out of a New Orleans frame of reference. And I do love the way that manifests in the moviegoer, because you have him with his aunt, who's sort of the Presbyterian theosophist. Well, the other aunt is a theosophist, and they're, you know it's all this kind of stultified thing, and then they go and see his family when he takes the girl down to the beach, and his mother's side of the family, and his mother's side of the family is the Catholics. And when you're reading the book, you all of a sudden you're breathing a different atmosphere. But even with them, you know he describes how there's like pictures of the Sacred Heart on the wall, not really being paid attention to. There's maybe a Catholic calendar that has, the fish fry and the bingo circled or whatever. It's very, very real. It's very culturally Catholic, and that's, I don't know. There's something comforting about that with Percy, that he's very real. He's not calling people out of the world to be like hermits or something. He's saying, this is where salvation and grace is found too. It's found in the bad Catholics, frankly. The Catholics
Oh,
of the Catholicism of New Orleans, where it's a very mixed bag, but
Mm.
because it's so deep down there in the roots, it's always trying to poke up into freshness, and there's a hope in that. It's never fully buried, and that's the importance that he seems to find there.
Mm.
Sorry, I cut you
I
off
think
there.
it's funny that you said bad Catholic, because I think in Percy's work, being a bad Catholic is a very good thing to be.
Yeah,
He does. He thinks that's great to be a bad Catholic. Like
yeah,
he'd prefer probably that you be a good Catholic, but very close second is just be a bad Catholic.
yeah, yeah, indeed. Oh well, maybe if you want, Sai, as we kind of get towards the end here, just a little bit on uh, your background with Chesterton, and or is this project helping you grow closer to Chesterton? Are you
Much, very much
kind of
so.
rediscovering things?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think I've read the things that everybody's read by
Hmm.
Chesterton, but now I'm reading the things that are not quite so uh, I don't know, universal.
Hmm.
The orthodoxy. Has everybody read that? I think every person has read that now, right? Like, are there any people that have not read it? but
Sadly, yes, but we're working on them. Yeah, we're getting
there, yeah, there are,
them.
right. But I actually, and I think I got to read more of his fiction. I haven't read the Father Brown stories, um, but I'm enjoying his kind of shorter books. Um, like I was astounded by the biography of St. Francis. I got to say, like that's not. I don't know if that's one that everybody reads. I don't really know in the canon of Chesterton, where that fits, if that's high or low. But anybody else, that would be the masterpiece of their
Yeah,
like it's. I was shocked reading it, like what he understands and just. I mean, his manner of expression is always kind of like just so it's so Chesterton. It's just you're just in the presence of this person that you just want the words to keep coming. So but it's not just that. It's that there's this his grasp of history in that book is extraordinary, where he says things almost offhand, where you're like, "Good Lord, I never even thought of that."
yeah.
He talks about. There's one part where he talks about. I was so struck by this about Saint Francis's canticle to Brother Sun, and he he notices something that I never ever would have noticed. There's no pagan mythology in it. There's no the whole Western poetic tradition would include references to you know Persephone, or it would include it was if you're going to talk about the seasons, which none of it in
Hmm.
Francis. And and I it was such a great insight about by Francis's time the ancient poetry had kind of worked its way out of the system of the European mind, and there was we were ready for something new, and here comes Francis, and he does something new. I like that's the kind of stuff where that's not just cleverly done phrases. That's a very good insight into uh, what has happened in the Middle Ages and where Francis places in it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I think hopefully the viewers, the listeners, got a little taste of just kind of who you are. And by the way, we'll have some links down in the show notes where you can tune in. Be sure to do so if you have a daytime commute and you get Catholic radio in your car in any way, and you can tune into Catholic Answers Live. Do so. Sai and the great apologists out there at Catholic Answers, at this wonderful apostolate that's so dear to us here at the Chesterton Society. They're doing such wonderful work, but I know that many of you will be attending in New Orleans and looking forward to seeing Sai talk. Cy, thank you again.
Oh, you've been so gracious to me. I always feel so awkward when I talk. Like my job is to do the interview. So after this, I got to go like do penance or something. I feel like, oh my gosh, how indulgent to talk so much. But thanks
No,
for the
you did.
opportunity.
Yeah, you did great on the other side of the microphone. It was
Oh, thank
fantastic.
you. Thank you.
Yes. All right. And thank you, Lee.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And thank all of you, viewers and listeners. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, do all those things that the robots like you to do to put this content in front of other people so that they can join us here in this wonderful Chesterton movement and hopefully join us down in New Orleans for Size Talk, for other great talks, and for all of the fun and fellowship that a Chesterton conference is, because as we always say here on Uncommon Sense, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless.